I am so excited to have Mike Roberts and Tree Fine here today. Tree, do you want to introduce yourself a bit?
Yeah, sure. So I've been working with Mike and Patrick and the SpyFu team and Rival Flow now for going on the last 10 years. And we've seen all kinds of things happen with Google Ads. And so, yeah, we've got a bit to share about that.
It is great to see your faces today. And today I want to cover, we're here to talk about the rise in cost for branded keywords on Google Ads. It sounds like, once again, there's some like mysterious levers being pulled in the background. But Google has this huge history with these levers and knobs and all of this stuff. Eventually, I think we're going to talk about how to maybe adjust those so any normal advertiser, boots on the ground, can like help fix things, and we'll talk about this specific issue. But first, Mike, do you want to give us a background on some of this work and your thoughts on what's going on?
Yeah, man. So, I was reading an article by Danny Goodwin from Search Engine Land, and it was all about this Google antitrust, trial. The one that there's funny enough, there's more than one Google antitrust trial, but this is the one where it's Google is hypothetically leveraging their search monopoly to inflate ad prices for advertisers. So pretty much right down our kind of pipeline, right? And so we've kind of always known that Google has these knobs, like you look back and they've just sort of eroded a little bit here and there, not here and there, but they've aggressively eroded like controls. Like there's no such thing as exact match anymore, and phrase match, moved. And you guys, if you've been following it for a while, you know that Google sets default settings that are like Google friendly, not so much profit friendly for you, but profit friendly for Google, right? So that's a thing that they've been always doing, and you kind of just expect that play, I guess, from a company that's a platform, right? It is what it is. But with this antitrust trial, there have been some like internal emails and communications and some sort of details about actually what they're doing. And some of the stuff is the opposite of transparent. It's pretty opaque. Like we would never know what they are. And it's funny, like some of the names that they give to the algorithm adjustments are they're like these Japanese characters or whatever that are friendly, and they're just like, oh man, you just straight up gave like this cute little name to this sort of nefarious little thing. Now we'll talk about how nefarious these things are, because there's two sides to every algorithm change, right? Like in general, if you know how it works, then you can benefit from it. Like, and on kind of both sides of it, I think that Google's trying to profit, but by knowing how they're trying to do it, we'll all be able to sort of game the system better and ultimately improve all of our metrics, right? So that's kind of, I feel like that's the goal of this conversation, as opposed to being like, I hate you, Google, you're so stupid and evil. Like it's like it's a mixed bag, right? Like it's just Google. They're a big, enormous entity, gigantic tech company. Are they a monopoly? They're as monopolistic as as they are vulnerable at this moment. So we'll see.
Well, in our past conversation, we talked about, the concept now of Google has too much power. But basically, they're taking control of their own playground, and we just have to play by their rules, unless those rules change, and they constantly do. So it kind of sounds like what you're saying is like, yeah, sometimes it sucks, but usually it's just a matter of adjusting to it, and finding out how to win within those guidelines.
Yeah, to some degree, right? So I'll give you like a high level of this is that what when I look through the algorithm changes that they've made, to me, and we'll go into the into the details of this, but to me, it looks like what should happen is that the keywords that should increase in bid price the most are your branded keywords. So the flip side to that is that so basically they're going to inflate the cost of you bidding on your own branded words to like show up on the top of Google. On the flip side of that, I guess the benefit, the silver lining is that it costs you less to bid on your competitors' keywords. So in a sense, they're sort of helping the little guy. That's one way of looking at it. Or they're completely screwing you in the B hole. Like however you want to look at it, it's like it's two sides of the same coin in a weird way.
Tree, do you have any thoughts on like previous instances where it seemed like Google might be screwing you in the B hole, but actually it was a manageable change that people just needed to adjust to for a bit?
That's a good question. Yeah, I've seen a lot happen in the branded world. And branded terms are something that absolutely have gone up in price. I think everyone's seen this over time, and we've definitely noticed it. I think that like if the second position is benefiting because the cost is higher for number one position, I guess we could look at that as like a win for the little guy. And I think, you know, the biggest recommendation that, or what I've done in our own accounts is we've generally kind of backed off. When we see an algorithm change that's going to spike things, we're going to feel it out. And usually that involves either raising budget or lowering budget. And historically, lowering budget is actually going to give us the best performance. So we've kind of tamed back some of the bidding, not to be as aggressive to try and take that top slot. So we've absolutely adjusted.
So Tree, is that for all or just branded or just competitors or what? Like what's the
I would say that it's more than just branded. I take that same approach. There are definitely terms where we can kind of own and dominate, and it's cost effective to take that top slot. But otherwise, just depending on how the pages are laid out, and I mean that's an ever-changing landscape as well, right? These ad formats, where they're going to be placed, what they're going to look like, what type of extensions and assets can be a part of that ad space. So that's kind of like a maze to juggle right now, because you want to aim for some position obviously above you know, top of page, but you have to be aware of what your ad's going to look like at that point. But yeah, generally underbidding the top performer is been a win. It's been a win often.
Mike, you've mentioned.
Actually, go ahead, Patrick. You do that.
I should let you two converse more. But something that is this what you have talked about when you've talked about optimizing for second place? Is that for second ad?
Definitely. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And position bidding is a little bit different. There's been position bidding changes over the years, but generally you can look at a really simple range of prices. Google tells you what it's going to cost to be at the very top and what it's going to cost you to be at just the top range of the page. And so bidding in that area and keeping your bids just under that top slot is directly what I'm referring to. And yes, it's the branded terms that get hit most for this. But
so specifically, do you aim for like position 2.0 or like 2.3 or like 1.8?
Good question. Yeah, generally I want to be up high. I want to be in number 2. But my main concern, honestly, because click-through rates kind of prove themselves over time, as long as we're in this kind of top range, we get a pretty steady performance. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't get a better performance in slot 1, but you're going to pay that premium, obviously a big premium.
So you want to talk about the reasons why that happens, Patrick? Like, I mean, should we go into the specific things?
Yeah, let's go into the specific. Let's go into the specific things, Mike. And I believe what you're talking about is the funnily named things.
Yeah.
That
well, the first one isn't that funnily named. But Tree just mentioned it in his when he was talking about that, which is the format pricing. So this one I think is kind of I think it's interesting because this one comes across to us. It's really well communicated to us. They said, hey, we're coming out with new formats. You can now have like site links and like whatever various types of formats that you get. And generally those formats wind up at the top of the page. Broadly speaking, they're top of page formats. So Google has this thing where they say, okay, you're going to bid 1 cent more than the number 2 bidder for the format. You're going to bid 1 cent more than the number 2 bidder for the format. There. So like, but if we introduce a brand new format where there's only one person that's going to make it, one advertiser that's going to make it into that slot, then you can charge whatever you want. So I'll give you an example. I kind of gave this in the pre-notes. So let's say that you're bidding on a display ad that's a 728 by 90 format, right? And let's say that the second place bidder is like $10. In this case, we'll go per CPM because that's kind of how you would normally bid for those. So let's say it's $10 per CPM for a 728 by 90. And so then you would wind up paying $10.01 as the winning bidder. You pay $10.01, right? But then let's say, but hey, you guys, we got this new format. It's called the 728 by 110 format, right? Yeah. But only one person can get it. And it's $50. And you can only get it if you're going to be the winning bidder anyway. So of the other auction. So it's like by introducing this new format, they're able to just set a price that's not nearly as competitive, because you have to have a certain quality score or long-term value. That's the LTV number that they're using, not lifetime value, but long-term value, in order to make that, which is like, what's the what goes into those things. So that's kind of their first way of manipulating that price for the top position. So, and of course, who's going to go into that top position on your brand? It generally is going to be you. You're going to have the highest quality score by a long shot. You're going to be the one that's delivered that slot, and then they're just going to set that price to whatever they want. Does that jive with what you've seen, Tree, or what do you think?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, kind of the fictitious price, or like some starting point. Obviously, it's based on something through a chain of algorithms, and it's hard to determine what that would be or how much flexibility. But it's really apparent that like Google's got, Patrick, you mentioned, or someone mentioned that Google is huge. They're vulnerable, but they've also got so many different dials, so many different knobs, and obviously that's why we're here having this chat. But this is a good example, and it's a good example of how much transparency there isn't really around this stuff.
Yeah, particularly, well, I mean, the interesting thing about it is that do you remember back in the day when back in the day, like, what was it? Nobody remembers back in the day, but it was what was the original one that Google ganked, that Yahoo owned, or what?
Oh, I don't recall. Did they stole something? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, they paid some money too, because they violated somebody's patent to get the AdWords. But it was they might have invented it at the same time. I'm not man, it's been a while since we've referenced that thing. But it used to be that the auction was purely transparent, and we're just a very, very long ways away from that. But the format pricing thing strikes me as like kind of like right out there in the open. Like, it's one of the things where they actually tell you about it. Like, I mean, I don't know that they tell you specifically that you're going to pay more, but there might be an expectation, like a reasonable expectation, that if you get more real estate, or if you get to add in features, that it's reasonable that you would pay a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Like if we wanted to add in ratings into it, put 5-star ratings next to SpyFu or RivalFlow or whatever, and they were like, pay 10% more or something, we might be like, yeah, okay, it's probably That's probably worth it, or we'll at
Right.
least test it. And if it's profitable for us, then we're if we make 20% and they make 10%, it's like fine. It's fine. It's good. I'll do that 100 times a day. A million, an infinite number of times a day, I guess.
So maybe that's
Yeah,
one.
they never mention price though. Sorry, Patrick.
No. That's they never
Yeah,
mentioned price.
they tell you all the wins. They roll out new features all the time. This is going to do better. We assure you. Use our strategy. Use our strategy. But yeah, the fine tuning that's going on behind is creating a price lift. It also kind of goes hand in hand. All these new things. What becomes really important is your account life, right? So that lifetime value, it matters. It really matters. I've dealt with a lot of new additions to Google Ads, and the one thing that you have to do constantly is fight the new guy. You are the new guy, and so the way that you overcome that is you have to overspend, and you spend heavy, and you build some account value, and that's kind of an inevitable and expensive fact of getting in to compete in Google Ads these days.
Yeah. So what does that mean exactly? So like what they're calling it is LTV, which we always call lifetime value internally. So it's like hard to like, but apparently that is long-term value. And I'm not quite sure whether or not that's account level or campaign level. That was one thing that was a little bit mysterious to me, is at what level are they determining long-term value? I suspect it would be weird if they weren't considering the account value, but
my hunch is that it's on multiple layers, and there are different rules for each of those. So yeah, you've got this kind of account level that they're looking for, structure, and maybe some things. Optimization scores might play a role in that. They definitely tout that a lot when you're in the account. They'll tell you, hey, your account's not optimized. But whatever it is, you do want to optimize, not necessarily for their little rating in the UI, but definitely to meet the algorithm and get to a point where you're not overspending.
Interesting.
Because at first you have to overspend. It's really the best way to get into Google Ads is to overspend up front.
What does that look like?
Yeah, there we go. Both.
Wait, say again.
What does that look like to overspend to get in?
Overspend means that, so when you come in generally as a new competitor, what's going to happen is everyone's kind of aware, and there starts to become these price increases. So you'll notice that some of your keywords that you launched with, now you have to raise bids on, and you do, and you'll continue to do that. So what I've found is that if you just kind of go up high, account for that. Because Google's just going to show you over time that you need to raise bids, and that's cool. You can do that, and it might take a couple days, couple weeks, couple months even, but you can kind of front run that. So get in, guesstimate where it's going to end, and I guess that just takes experience, but you can kind of look at the keywords you're up against and what people are paying. Basically get in, overspend, make sure you're getting the clicks. Google's going to start liking you. It's going to get a good read on your click-through rate, which is a huge determinant here, right? So your click-through rate is really kind of what drives all of your quality scores and your end price, if you will. So that's what you do. You front run what would otherwise be this ramp up period where you're constantly getting outbid by competitors. And every time you're outbid, think of it as messing with the Google algorithm. You're being removed. They need to find a new competitor that's going to take the slot. When you're not there, someone else is. So Google likes the players that are willing to be there all the time, of course, because it's consistent click revenue. So yeah, front run that, get up there, get as high and consistent, make Google as much money as possible up front, and then the bids will start to level out. They'll come down, and then you can pull back, and hopefully by then you've got this LTV. And this LTV is going to help you ride even when you drop your bids back down. So that's my kind of overarching strategy for any new account. And it kind of handles those things, and maybe that's why I've done it, right? I've kind of learned that this is the way that you beat these branded terms or other terms.
How long do you run that for at a high and an elevated amount?
That's a really good question. I would say 2 weeks to a month, and it's probably more dependent on dollars. So it's probably dependent on the amount of dollars you spend. It's probably a budget estimate. Maybe $5,000 to $10,000 is a good intro to most spaces in Google, most verticals. And $5,000 to $10,000 is going to allow you to kind of front run and see what your actual performance is at. That's a ballpark again.
So Tree, I'm going to describe to you like what I think is like the biggest mistake that people make in PPC, in ads in general, in ad networks in general, right? Like Google ads in particular, but also like this is a similar issue in Facebook or really any big ad network. And I actually didn't know this, and I learned it from you. And so here's what I think people do a lot is they will set up their AdWords account. Sorry, I said AdWords. They'll set up their I'm old school.
I still call it AdWords sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not alone.
They'll set up their Google Ads account, and they, you know, they basically put in all their ads, they put in all their keywords, and they basically set up the whole campaign. And then they set a bid to like what they think it should be. Maybe they want it to be like a couple $100s a day. And then they come back the next day and it's, you know, like spent like $30. And they're like, okay. So then they come back the next day and it's spent like $40. And they're like, okay, cool. So it's going to spend about $50 a day. So then they drop their budget to $50. And then they come back and they sort of set it and forget it. They like walk away, come back like a month later, let's say, have a look at it, and it's spent, lo and behold, like roughly $1,200. And they're like, yeah, okay, so that's the size of my market. Like it's still hanging in there. I'm not running into my $50. And so it's fine. And maybe they'll even give it a little headroom. Like maybe they'll even put it to like $80 and give it that. And but what they come back to is that, you know, they're spending a couple $1,000 a month. Had they done it differently and set that budget, actually, maybe I should ask you the question: are they doing it right?
That's interesting. So the budgets, I think the budgets that I'm mostly referring to are going to be the actual click bids, right? So not necessarily the account general budget, the daily spend, but the specific click bids are where I'm talking about inflating prices purposely in that case.
Gotcha. So here's where I think that these people would be making a mistake is by setting your bids, by setting your bid amount to $200 initially, and then coming back and seeing that it actually spent $30, and then dropping your ceiling to $50. You should be like leaving that at $200 or something. Give as a rule of thumb, I would say, after like your first day, give it like 10x or 5x headroom. If you actually want to see where it's going to level out, that's what takes like 2 weeks, because basically what's happening is that Google and you, or Facebook and you, or whoever and you are building some kind of a trust. They're testing out your ads to figure out what your click-through rate is, whether or not you're going to pay your bill. Like a whole bunch of things are happening where they're gathering feedback and deciding whether or not to take you broader. But in the first few days, they don't push you to the entire audience. They push you to a subset of the audience. So, so I've got my camera will zoom in on me, and if I just make hand gesticulations, it does some things. So, so yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Is that still the case? I know that I learned that, I don't know, 10 years ago. But.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's just the way that Google basically rolls you into the ad rotation, if you will, right? So that ultimate ad rotation takes a minute for Google to put you in there. And also, if you have a low budget, you're not going to get favored. You're going to get kind of bad slots. You're going to get bad times. You're going to get bad amounts of traffic. So you don't just get less traffic when you underbid. You actually get less quality traffic, lower quality traffic, right? So the prime, everything just works when you bid higher in that respect. But yeah, that's true. The ramp up period is going to happen. And they're going to fit you into rotation. And yeah, you should always have headroom. Technically, you should always have headroom.
I always thought it'd be like a good idea also. I mean, I don't know. I don't think this is a good idea. What I'm saying is I used to think a long, long time ago that it would be a good idea to like do day parting, you know, like bid only during business hours where you are or something, and then shut it off and then turn it on, and then shut it off and then turn it on. I feel like that really messes with their ability to give you scale. What do you think?
Yeah, agreed. Generally, if you can have a 24-hour uncapped budget, you'll find the best performance in Google, period. Anytime you're restricting times of day that you're not advertising, you're not really taking potential. I guess it kind of plays a part in that LTV. I think that there's a part of your willingness to spend full time that is going to increase that LTV, if I had to guess what that algorithm's doing. Yeah.
I mean, because these ad systems are scaled, you know, internationally to the edges, right? So they're basically like a CDN, you know, so that they can serve ads really quickly. So actually deploying your ads is a process that is non-trivial from a technical perspective. So it actually takes time to get the ads out to the edges. That's how they're served. Anyway, that's kind of a bit of a side jaunt, isn't it? But it felt relevant in the moment.
Sure, it's
but
good.
you guys want to get back to the so that format pricing thing is, by the way, the one called Momiji that we just talked about, you know, I guess 20 minutes ago now. I'm not sure.
So that's Momiji. Is that how it's pronounced?
I have no idea how it's pronounced. That's how I pronounce it, and I believe I am correct. I'm pretty sure.
No argument for me. Yeah.
And it was funny when I was looking up Momiji, it was actually kind of difficult to find unless you put it in terms of Google. Do you think they're being intentionally opaque with that, like naming things weird? I'm jumping right into that.
I think that they're just dorks. You know, it's like who's gonna name this? Probably the software development team, right? And what are they gonna name it? Like, I'll tell you, we have some pretty weird named servers here at SpyFu, and yeah, it fits.
That's completely fair. That makes a lot more sense than the evil diabolical.
Oh, it could totally be evil and diabolical too.
So we talked about format pricing, and it's one of the various types of pricing. I've been learning a whole bunch of new acronyms and names, but let's talk about RGSP, randomized, generalized, second price ad auctions. And this Mike, do you want to dive into that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, this is one where I feel like this might be like a better form of an auction. So there's a guy that works for Google who says, you know, sometimes when an ad has a really high click probability, the guy that works at Google is Preston McAfee. Okay, so he says when someone has a really high ad click probability, they're very hard to beat. So it's not really a competitive auction. So that they don't just win every auction, we do squashing. That makes the auction more competitive. Wait a minute, we're talking about squashing. That's not the right thing. Dang it, Patrick. My bad.
It was so close.
You want to talk about squashing instead, dude? Should we?
Not really. No, I mean, you wanted to talk about the RGSP thing. I think we should talk about RGSP. I just don't have it. I didn't. That's the one that I didn't copy and paste into my notes here. So like,
I got your back. I got your back right here.
Let me. I can flip over though and pull up that one.
There's the link.
I don't know that I see the RGSP as actually being like this debate or like something is wrong. I don't know if there's a wrong or right answer to that one, personally.
And I was curious if that was more. I was curious if that related into our optimizing for second bid anyway, or if I'm just like completely, or if those are two completely different things.
I think the general debate, if you will, is whether or not the top bidder, right? So they give this example of how Amazon would always be at the top if they didn't randomize. And so I actually think that, like, I don't know what the outcome would be. I don't know if Amazon's going to benefit from being at the top all the time, or if they benefit more from being randomized, right? Like that's a potential outcome, is that it actually benefits Amazon more to not always be at the top. They might get ignored. I'm not saying I would lean that direction, but my point is that randomizing is now going to take away those possibilities. So I'm kind of in favor of the randomizing. I think it's okay. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily think it hurts any particular audience, I guess is my point.
Do you think it's interesting because the RGSP is part of the Department of Justice, like it's part of their case. It's like one of their slides. And if you take like the sort of format pricing and the squashing and that kind of stuff, these are things where advertisers are generally united as like, why are you doing that? Like, stop, that's opaque and annoying. On the flip side, the RGSP sort of gives, it creates diversity in the ads and also kind of gives the little guy a chance, right? You know, but I guess the downside to it is that what I would say is that, all right, so you want to be number one on your own brand, right? Like that's what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So you're gonna, like, I want to be number one on my own brand. I'm gonna bid $300 per click to make sure that I'm always there, right? And then I look at the thing obsessively and I'm like 1.2, and then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to $400, and then it's like 1.1, you know, and it's like, I know nobody's bidding $400 for my, you know, to bid to be here. And so what's happening is that they're just giving, you're never going to get to actual one, right? So there's like this possible net effect if you're not taking that into account. If you don't understand how the system works, you could just basically outbid yourself, you know, and kind of stretch the efficacy of their other optimizations, of their other dials, by raising your ceiling, right? What you want to do is lower your ceiling so that the other optimizations that they do, you know, don't screw you over, right? So that's why when Tree's talking about aiming for position 2, yeah, don't aim for position 1.0. If you want to aim for position 1.8 or 2.3, you know, somewhere in that range, but just definitely don't over optimize for the number one spot, because they're never going to give it to you 100% of the time. That's what RGSP specifically says.
Yeah, and it's also kind of at least the way I understood it is that maybe I wish the little guy had more of a chance there, but I think what's actually happening is that it only comes into effect when you've got these ad ranks that are basically the same. So you've got kind of these very similar outputs, is what they said. So as long as they're close enough, then they'll go through this randomization algorithm. So there's only like a certain portion of ads that are going to go through that randomization. It's not all ads. It has to be the ones that are similar enough. So the number 2 guy who's clearly underbidding, I don't know that he would be rolled into that randomization. So it's generally the top players. You think of like the Progressive and Geico scenario where they want to show up all the time, but you can't. There's just no way to do it. And I think the argument might be around, historically what we've been taught is that it's an auction system, right? And so if you bid higher, you should get the win. And I think that's where maybe the majority of the debate's coming in, is that.
Yeah, but let's sort of like put this in the context of where the RGSP is being combined with the squashing, right? So let's talk about what the squashing is, and then how, when you, this is the thing, is they get the knobs and the dials and the algorithms that they, you know, that they have are all interacting, you know? So you have to kind of understand how that's all going to work together. But I guess we first have to talk about what the squashing is, right? And this is the one that's called, it's got the other Japanese name. It's Kukamon.
Kukamon. Mike, can your camera's doing the office thing again. That's all I can focus on, and I want to focus on Kukamon.
Dude, so the thing about the camera focusing, it's pretty cool if you're watching me in 1x speed, but if you're watching me in 2x speed, it's super it makes it really, really intense.
Yeah.
So anyway, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about squashing. Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about squashing. Mike, can you tell us about squashing?
Yeah, I can. All right. So squashing is like the most nefarious sounding one of these algorithm, these knobs that they've got, right? And I think that it actually is, and I think it's the one that's most important to understand because it's kind of pretty opaque, I think. So this one here. This one basically takes, it says, let's say that the top ad has a really high probability of click-through, a PCTR of, let's say 10%, right? And then because it's your brand, right? Your brand, your ad, you've got a 10% click-through rate on it. The next best advertiser has, let's say, a 4% predicted click-through rate. So what Google does is it closes that gap, not necessarily linearly, right? But it's going to close the gap between you and the second place. So it raises the second place by giving them an inflated, essentially, what is it called? Long-term value, right? So it increases their long-term value artificially to kind of like improve competition, hypothetically, let's say. But also what that does is that it means that you, the winner, the branded winner, pays more for your own brand, right? And the thing is that this is something that applies to all keywords, not just branded keywords. If you're bidding on, rollerball pen, right? A very broad commercial keyword where there's probably lots of bidders and it's generally a purely efficient marketplace. The number one bidder might be getting a predicted click-through rate of 5%, let's say. And then the second place might be like 4.8%. So what happens is that the algorithm, this Kukaman squashing algorithm, is going to like move that from like 4.8 to say 4.82, And so you're gonna wind up paying like 1% more or something, like, right? Like maybe 2-3% more. But with the branded stuff, they've got plenty of room to create a more artificially fair price that they call art. They're like, it's like higher but more fair. And the reason that they would say that it's fair is because you're profitable on your branded keywords. People look at their own AdWords account and Google provides them with those analytics, and they look at them and they're like, we make a crap load of sales from our own brand. Never mind the fact that we're just sort of paying a ransom to be there because we're already in the organic #1 spot. But whatever, Google's like, you're willing to pay more. If we raise the price, you'll still stick around because there's extra value. There's extraneous value in this whole thing. You're still willing to pay. So they think it's more fair and they can justify that statement. But the net result is that the cost of your branded keywords goes up more than non-branded keywords as a percent and as like probably real dollars. So I'm going to go ahead and state my case for the flip side of that, right? The flip side of that, as all algorithms have two sides generally, a winner and a loser. The winner is the competitor. The winner is your competitors. The winner is the competitor bidding on your brand, right? They're not paying fair market value, right? They're not paying in a perfect economy. You would dominate that spot. You would get your 10% click-through rate, and they would have to pay, if they had a 4% click-through rate, they'd have to pay 2.5 times more in order to achieve the same, in order to achieve parity with you. Google's saying, well, rather than having to pay 2.5% or 2.5 times more, you're going to have to pay 2 times more, let's say, or 1.5 times more. We're going to make it a little less of a pure competition. So as the person bidding on your competitor's brand, that's where you can find relatively meaningful advantage versus what the pure market would provide. What do you think, Trey?
Yeah, that's solid. I mean, essentially what's happening is that ad rank is determined, right? Ultimately, where you're going to be is determined by quality score and a number of factors. And what's happening is that Google is now based on a spread. It's kind of like spreads in a market. But basically, they've got this wiggle room now to where they can manipulate your quality score, which in turn, obviously, is going to change your end bid requirement. So yeah, they've a lot of wiggle room on branded terms, right? Like Mike mentioned. So yeah, that's complete. Yeah.
So the calculation that they wind up doing is, I believe, based on this not lifetime value, but long-term value, and components of long-term value are ad rank, which a component of ad rank is quality score, and then the other component is bid, right? So like the problem is that you don't really know how to improve your long-term value, because that's opaque. They provide you with quality score, but not the actual end. That's like, which is a component to long-term value. But then they have this, who knows what else goes into it, right? Like, who do you know? Like, are you friends with the Google Ads PM? Like, because if you are, then some good things are going to happen. I don't know. We don't know. It's opaque. Like, anything could happen there.
I mean,
It is generally, I think it's going to favor the large budgets.
Yeah.
From what I've seen, it's always going to be true. You just gain favor with larger budgets. So that's part of the algorithm. That's not the whole thing, but that's a key component.
Or maybe it's the large budget, but like also the likelihood of having it go away, right? Like the elasticity, like they may be somehow calculating like account level elasticity, so I don't know. Like we that's the downside to like not knowing things. So all we can do is guess on the additional components of long-term value.
It's true though. You do see it though over time with a new account. You get to this point where all of a sudden you've got a different level of performance, and we talked about that taking 2 weeks or a month or whatever. But yeah, it happens. So it definitely breaks into this realm where you're now accepted. And I would agree. It has to do with your stickiness. Google wants to make sure that you're there. You're going to serve all day, for instance. You're not pausing the account every day. Things like that are going to matter. So yeah, everything's going to play a role. So I think, yeah, you being there, Google wants to know that you're consistent.
Okay. So here's the deal. Coming back around to the RGSP thing, right? We've got like this, we got this thing called long-term value, where at least two of the components are your bid price and ad rank, which has a ad quality component to it, right? Probably that's like essentially a derivative of effective CPM, right? Like probably all that stuff has to do with click-through rate times. I mean, the correlation coefficient between quality score and effective CPM it's like 0.9. It's super high, like 0.9 out of his -1 to 1 scale. It's it's pretty close to exact match. So my point is that that when we combine the two algorithms, the net output, the net result is that when you have like this kind of possibility where by trying to get into that #1 spot, like trying to get to the 1.1 and going from, we were talking about going from like 1.4 to 1.3 to 1.2 to 1.1 and just increasing your bids to get there so that you can get the perfect 1.0 score, right? Like of being in the #1 spot on your most important keyword at all times. You're incrementing your bid. The problem is that by incrementing your bid, you're creating a larger gap between your long-term value and the next bidder's long-term value. And when you do that, Google's going to eat up, like, let's say, a larger and larger portion of that and basically artificially inflate the #2 bidder's bid amount, their long-term value. They're going to artificially inflate that. And so let's say you're willing to pay $10 and they were willing to pay, they were going to pay $4. Now they're going to pay $5. But if you increase your bid to try to get that 1.1 position instead of the 1.2 position to $20, now they're going to pay, now there's going to be artificially inflated to $6 where it was at $4, and you're going to wind up paying $6 instead of $5. you know, even though there's no real competition there, and you're never going to get that #1 position anyway, right? You're not going to get actually 1.0 because of RGSP. Does that fit? You feel my vibe? Are you vibing with me?
Yeah.
Well,
Man, glad I got that out of my face hole. Like that was like, I don't know how that's gonna come across, but I feel like I captured some amount of it in a mildly cogent way. I'm not positive, but the interaction between these relatively, you know, RGSP and squashing, I think we got it out there.
and that's fantastic. I'm going to go a bit off script because I've been thinking about this for a bit as we converse. It sounds like there's a whole emotional aspect to this. There's a sense of loss. There's, you know, especially for newer companies, but even for us, when our competitors outrank us, there's this. And do you think, one, we could get a little conspiracy theory? Do you think Google's leveraging that emotional aspect? Or moreover, you two have been in this game for so long, and you have a very level head of this is what's going on, and these are the, you know, these are the bumps in the road that we're going to have to face. But I don't think that's everyone. I don't think that's all advertisers. I don't think that's all entrepreneurs or business owners. What would you recommend to people to not overbid, to not cling to certain keywords or the brand, you know, whether it's their brand name or anything? What would be some like advice or approaches?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I think inherently over the years, Google absolutely wants to automate more for us, and through automating, they're going to control some of these dials, some of these levers that you may otherwise have, you know, control of in your account, such as where your ad's going to serve. I know Mike brought this up. We were talking, and there are instances where when you start an account, Google's going to serve your ads to your bakery shop to people who live in Germany, because they happen to have at some point shown some interest in your location. And you might not want to bid on that, but by default, you're going to, right? It's a good example. So Google is automating, they're making things real simple. They're like, hey, don't worry, we'll find your audience for you. But that could be really expensive, and they don't tell you that part of it, right? So I'll stop there because there's many things that we could go on. I'm sure Mike's got, you know, some tidbits on this as well. So.
No, I mean, I think that there is this path where we can go down about like pretty messed up like default settings that Google has. But kind of going to your point, I guess, about the sense of loss. I mean, I guess we do. There's I'm a bit conflicted about, and I always have been, about whether or not Google ought to be in the business of having people advertising on their own brands in general. It's because they rank you. And I feel like if you got the first rank, then you kind of ought to have it kind of for free. Like, I mean, they make 20% of their revenue on it, and advertisers make potentially 40% of their ad revenue, of their revenue, you know, of their sales off of branded advertisement. So like, it's a business, it's an important business, but it just doesn't seem like, I feel like you should be able to bid on competitors' keywords, but like if you have the #1 organic spot, they should just probably give it to you. That's kind of how I've always felt. I would feel a little bit skeezy charging people for the top ad spot and just like putting, you know, it just seems a little weird. Like maybe they optimized for that too early and now they can't get off of that teat, but like it's, I don't really think that they should have done it in the first place. And I think that it creates a decent amount of ill will, and they probably could have created more value in various ways by not doing it. Like, who really wants to see an ad followed by an organic result of the same thing? Like, it's not like a good search experience. It's just stupid. Like, I personally like scroll past it because I feel bad clicking on somebody's ad. Probably like, I don't know. Do you guys do that?
Yeah, I always scroll past.
Yeah.
No, I
Like,
don't
Yeah,
want
I
to
think
touch
everyone
the
does. I think it would be really cool to join them. I always thought that like same type of thing. Like if you've proven to Google that you're the authority on something, then that should be noted in your ad. And hey, here you go. Here's the guy that not only has an ad running that you can see, but they're also got a proven track record, right?
Yeah, I would like to see them, if anything, decreasing those prices for the brand itself. Like, they should be moving away from that like money grab. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not good for anybody. Like, it doesn't make anybody happy. It makes the entire world kind of mad at each other. Like, like, why are these guys advertising on my brand? Like, okay, well, like, at least if you're above your competitor, who cares who has the number 2 spot, right? Like, so that's what I think that they should do. But it's a business, and they do report to Wall Street, and that's kind of a fundamental aspect of the unfortunate, push and pull, which to me, there is a bit of this, right? So there's a bit of this where you kind of see like a company that's like been good, and you kind of admire kind of going down this very obvious slippery slope, right? Like, you can read the emails that they go through, and they're like, oh, our employees' morale would be decreased if we had another stock slip. We should turn this knob that kind of harms our customers, our core customers, not the ones that come to the search page and search for things, because screw those guys, they're not paying anything. The advertisers are their real customers, right? Those are the ones that are paying the bills. And so they're just like, yeah, they'll pay an additional, if we jack up the prices by 10%, only 5% of them will go away. And then we'll all not have our stock prices go down. And it's like, really, guys, like, where's your actual North Star? Like, when did that become your North Star? Who cares if your employees' morale goes down? Like, you're not producing value by doing this. Like, it's a zero-sum thing that you're doing by jacking that up. So, yeah, I feel like the sense of loss is in this kind of like, where you had like this company that's all about like transparency and like kind of doing good things in the world, just kind of being like what big companies always wind up doing, because it's these incremental decisions that straight up lead you to that path. Like, it's not, nobody takes the path of going to evil, right? What they do is they make like these incremental changes that sacrifice their customers for like some random quarterly increment. And that's what they've done month after month, year after year, for probably the last 5 years or 6 or 7 years. Like, they've like kind of lost their way. But I'm optimistic. I think that they could find their way back. They just have to sacrifice some revenue at some point, make some like it's a good opportunity now for them to do a reset with the competition that they have with AI stuff. So like, maybe they will. Maybe they're just like, look, guys, we're gonna lose $20 billion in revenue year over year, but we're still a good company. We still have a lot of revenue. that's only like 20% of our revenue or something. It's like, 10% of our revenue. We're like super rich. We're Google. We're fine. Like,
and that brings us to a fantastic point, and that's today, and kind of where this whole thing started. They're in this suit, trying to figure with the Department of Justice, trying to figure out if they're a monopoly. It's understandable why people are upset. People, and so not for the first time, they're being brought before judges to figure out what that is. Do you have any thoughts on the case specifically, or is there any value that we can glean from that? Or is it just kind of business as usual with Google?
I mean, they did just have this thing today where they, I think you sent it over in the Reuters article, where they actually just paid the Department of Justice. Like,
right?
They just like randomly wrote them a check. Like, they're like, well, we already paid you. so let's not have a trial. And, but at the same time, they said the Department of Justice has only been able to come up with a grand total of $1 million in damages to, you know, I'm like, oh, I don't feel like that's likely. I feel like we could, like that wouldn't be that hard to hypothetically come up with some damages. But the question is, what is damaging, right? Like, I believe that the case that they're trying to prove is that Google is a monopoly, and that they ignore and evidence of that is that they ignore competitors' pricing in order to set their pricing. So I do have an opinion on that, but I'm curious what you think about it, Tree.
Wow. Yeah. So, okay. So you're saying that one of the requirements is that they would ignore competitor pricing, right? To set their pricing.
Well, that's like an evidence, right? So it's like, so is it?
I don't have a lot of feedback on that. I haven't paid attention to a whole lot about what they're kind of in jeopardy of losing right now in this case.
That's cool. I can just give my opinion on it.
Yeah, go for it.
I just didn't want to, like, you know, run all the way through the whole conversation. You know, I have a tendency to be able to monologue.
Yeah, no, you're good.
That's great.
All right, so the idea is that Google doesn't take their competitors' pricing into account in order to set their pricing, and that's like evident. That's what, like, monopolies don't do this, right? And so my thinking on this is that they clearly do take their customers' behavior into account, right? So, like, in a very calculated way, they're like, well, if we raise the price on these particular ads by 10%, we lose 5% of customers, but we still keep 5% more revenue. And that will allow us all to avoid seeing our 401ks decrease or our stock option pools decrease. Like, they literally make these very precise calculations that on one hand seems very craven and like really not what you want to see them doing. Or maybe you do. Maybe you think that you should value your employees over your customers. And that's a take too. Like, I value employees a lot. I value our employees' happiness here. And so they should be thinking about their teams. But is that, like, I feel like that's more evidence that they're paying attention to the market than evidence that they're just able to wildly do whatever they want. Furthermore, I think that Google's in a fight for its life right now, in terms of like the you know, search engine stuff, right? Like, they're trying to reinvent. I don't know if they're going to be able to. They might not. There's like stiff competition from AI. I think that they're like not really like the kind of company that can easily become a monopoly, because it's so easy for customers to leave for a better product, or also to get mad and just leave because they're like, I don't like you. I don't like what you stand for. Like, moving to a different search engine is really pretty easy, and we can keep going to Google because they're pretty good. They're good. They're the best at what they do, and we have a lot of inertia towards that. It's baked in, but and they're, you know, I feel like they're being replaced a little bit from my perspective, by OpenAI and potentially by Perplexity and that kind of thing. But, you know, I feel like they're in a pretty vulnerable spot from a monopoly perspective. Like, they may not need to be broken up. Like, they're in a fight.
That's fascinating. That's an interesting take. And another interesting thing is that Tree, you specifically haven't really been paying attention to it. Someone who is running the ads, it doesn't seem like it matters that much what's going on in the, you know, in the courtrooms or anything. What matters is, you know, what you're seeing in Google ads, you know, what we're actually spending, what revenue we're getting. And this eventually, or maybe right now, You were talking about displaying ads in Germany, the automation that Google wants to employ. So should we start talking about those knobs? Mike, you had a kind of a crazy story about where we were getting advertised, and it's like, oh no. I mean,
I want to talk about those knobs because it's a really
let's
fun.
talk about some knobs. I want to hear about it.
We have a crap load of like firsthand accounts and actual wisdom, I guess, to the extent that wisdom comes from suffering. But when we launched Rival Flow Tree, I know we had this thing where we launched an ad campaign with the default settings for ad targeting, and we were targeting the US. And but there's this default, and oh god, like if you've gone into the Google Ads user interface like lately, it is just it's like labyrinthine, like almost I feel like it's intentionally impossible to understand. Like, I'm an expert. Like, I've been doing this for a very long time. I've built a company on it. I don't think that I'm like anywhere close to a noob. I go in there, I have no idea actually where to find particular settings. Anyway, you fire up this new campaign, and one of the sort of hidden default settings that, you know, if you go and you look, you'll find that it's something you should turn off, but it's a new default. And they like roll out these new defaults for new campaigns like every freaking week. Anyway, so this default is when you're targeting an area, it's people who live in that area or who are interested in that area, right? So people who live in the United States or who are interested in the United States. So we fired these things up, and then we get like all kinds of traffic that's like not converting or whatever. And we just got like, if we look in our like clarity, or we watch traffic come to the site, we are getting a lot of Google ad referral traffic from Nigeria, just like a gigantic amount. And we're like, well, you go in there and you look, and it's like, well, we're targeting the US. So like, we may not be paying for that traffic. Like, it's coming in and it feels like it might be falsely attributed, but it's coming in nonetheless. So I'm picturing these, when we find out that it's the US and people who are interested in the US, I'm like, oh my god, people in like Nigeria are like watching Friends reruns on YouTube, and then are suddenly getting targeted with like our Rival Flow campaigns, and then they're obviously clicking through. And that's the picture that I have in mind. Tree, do you have any color to add? I mean, this was like a first, like I'm kind of relaying this first and third hand, but like, or whatever that's called, second hand. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't clearly explain the evolution, but what I have seen is that it's become more profound. So all of these defaults seem to be defaultier, if you will. And so there's a lot of these things that are doing the whole default thing. But yeah, the location thing is something that it's multiplied almost. So like back in the day, the setting existed, and you would occasionally get some conversions coming through out of your location, and you'd be like, okay, cool. It looks like it's justifying itself. I got a conversion. But now there's like tons more trash that comes from that. So the default aspect now is not very handy. From my experience, I think it's way better to have control and look at these individual prices that you pay to acquire a user here versus there. So yeah.
So are there any? So do you remember like there used to be like a crap load of bid management platforms, and it was like kind of the hot product, hot software startup, and like, I don't know, like the 2014 range, and you know, those things were a pretty big deal for a while, you know, like Marin Software, Kenshu, those guys.
Yeah, we even engaged with one for a while to get kind of a programmatic approach to our SpyFu AdWords account, which was really cool, and we let that run for a little bit. We ended up backing out of that because there was some control that we wanted even in their automation that wasn't quite nailing what we needed to nail. But yeah, bid platforms were huge.
Can you imagine being one of those bid platforms at this moment, like I don't know that you could possibly keep up with the rate that they're just making everything just absolutely way different.
Yeah. Google's main approach, what I've kind of noticed is I think that there's a way to start an account that's different than the way you eventually manage your account. And if you take Google's default settings, that's not how they approach it. They approach it as though you're the top winner already, and therefore do our suggestions. And I think that's a horrible way to start a campaign. I think the best thing to do in the campaign, if you want to get some idea of whether Google's working, because all these claims are saying, hey, use our suggestion, it's going to work, right? It's going to make you money. But you're going to have no baseline to test that against. And so generally, when starting out a campaign, I think the best thing you can do is turn off everything that's default, manage each thing so you get a baseline metric. For instance, here's a good example: ad rotation. When you sign up, when you create your first ads in a Google Ads campaign and a new campaign, by default, they're going to rotate. So if you have 3 ads, it's going to rotate them based on which one Google thinks is going to win. And what happens is that you end up not getting sufficient data on your other ads. You don't have enough data because Google's not serving them. And so in order to get your baselines, it's always better to start, manage everything manually, and then maybe take on some of their automation at that point. And you have a baseline then to compare against. But yeah, they're basically asking you to fly blind.
Interesting.
With the defaults. That's what ends up happening.
Yeah, totally. It's I don't really. I'll hold off on a second on talking about like the cultural aspect of over optimizing, but like I kind of want to go back to this concept where you got like the location and people like that are interested in that location, because for us, we're trying to target the United States, right? If you were trying to target like San Diego, California, targeting people that are interested in San Diego, California might broadly be a good idea, right? Like if you're interested in the Padres, like if or if you're planning on travel or whatever, that might be a good optimization for like a local business. So it's interesting, right? Like, because at least they're not totally the examples that we're giving now, they're actually totally screwing over everybody, but like but like the examples that we have today aren't like, hey, Google's trying to screw you over if you're like a small business person. It's like your locksmith shop is getting completely decimated because they're just super evil and trying to take all of your locksmithing money. They're more like roughly screwing over big brands that have a national audience. So like that's like the key takeaway. And we're not like a huge brand, but we spend money on branded advertising, and it's annoying when they do all these things. And straight up, like we might have lost 100 grand in traffic, in money that we spent on like those on the Rivalful launch, like targeting random ass countries that
Sure
we don't have a solution for, or who knows? Like you just don't know. You don't know which click you're paying for. Like it is kind of an annoying thing that I can see the person click on the site, but I can't trace them back into the Google Ads account. Like there's no way that I can say this person I paid this amount for. You can't even really say that I paid this amount for this click, or I paid this amount for this keyword, other than in aggregate. Like you don't really know at the granular level. It would be awesome, but even in BigQuery, when you import all of the data directly, there is no way to actually get to the actual click. I've tried. I would love it if it were the case, but the lowest level of granularity is like day 8 or something like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just, unfortunately, there's a huge audience that uses Google Ads, and so you've got a lot of people who just don't really kind of understand what these defaults are going to do. They don't know the difference between them, and that's a tricky thing. I think education's lacking. A lot of people fall into these traps.
I mean,
you're saying that like maybe that's the first thing to focus on, default settings, and just turning them all off and doing it manual? Do you, I mean, it almost seems like some of the complicated process of this is intentional, and that they're kind of leading us through a rat race so we can finally find it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's automation. I think that Google has they've got goals, and those goals are that it will be automated. And so as we're reaching that point of automation where everyone's kind of, we don't fully trust it yet, right? Because we haven't seen the results outperforming what we do yet. And so if you just take the advice out of the box, then you're really flying blind because you just have no sense of what your baseline would be. Because there are a lot of defaults that get turned on in the account, not just location, but just a lot of things. The way that basically, if you set up in a campaign in Google right now, you're going to be encouraged to let Google do all of your bidding, right? So you're not going to set even bids for keyword prices. Google's going to do all of that. And so it's really hard. In fact, you have to dig through the account if you even want to find out how to manually bid anymore. So to go to what's called manual CPC mode. And again, I would recommend that as a starting point, because that's what's going to give you kind of your baseline of performance. And then let's see if automation can help, is my approach.
So for the sake of, I don't know, history or something, I'll give like a boomer take on it, right? Because like, let's say that somebody's like, back in my day, we placed ads in magazines and we called people and then they gave us a price. And you know what the price was? Whatever the F they wanted to tell us, that was the price.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, you got some of that still today. Like, so how about TikTok, right? Like, there's zero attribution. You can't even tell where a click came from because it doesn't click. It's dark traffic, all of it. Like, we do click TikTok advertising, and I'm like, well, I'll attribute some portion of dark traffic on a particular day to a campaign, but otherwise, it might as well be an ad on the side of a bus with hopefully you have a QR code there so somebody can get it as it goes by. But like, is there, are we whining? Is there any of that going on? I mean, are they taking things away that they didn't have to give us in the first place?
I do whine sometimes, but I think some of it's justified without a doubt. I've tested, so I've done the testing, right? So I've seen the automation, and then I've compared that against what we do. In fact, I mean, a good example is that we pulled away from bid management after learning. It definitely helped with many things. Using an automated bid management platform was great, right? It's automation, and it was able to scale things in a way that humans really couldn't do anyway. But then being able to get back in there and fine tune it really required kind of manual effort.
Yeah.
So maybe it's whining. I whine a bit about things, right, and headaches and things that are out of my control. But doing enough testing kind of solved that for us at least. And we just have to encounter each new thing that happens. There's defaults added, like you said, weekly. The Google Ads updates happen all the time.
But it is okay. So if there's a component to it where we're whining, the reality is that Google did give us something pretty cool in the beginning, and they did set a bar for themselves as a company that you could trust and that was transparent and that basically wouldn't screw you over, right? Internally, we have this thing where it's not dicks, and we hold fast to our rule of not treating our customers poorly, of doing the right thing. And you look at a company over a period of time, and when they start to go down this path where they start to lose people's trust, the people that really are kind of like their biggest fans, maybe we should be holding them to the standard that they set for themselves, right? That I feel like that's what customers do, right? Hold you to account and make you live up to your ideals, and they're not living up to their ideals. I think that they're over optimizing. I think that they have a culture of turning the dials rather than creating value at this moment. Like in their history, I think that they've done created a lot of a massive amount of value in the world and really done great things. And now they're basically just like, milking this pig. They're just trying to milk a pig, dude. That's what they're doing. They're milking the pig.
Milking the pig. I agree.
The end, man. And then they're making us eat pig milk. And that's what it is.
Pig milkers. Yeah.
I mean, that's a fantastic conclusion. I was going to wrap it up anyway. Can we just wrap it up on pig milkers? Like, I think
Right.
we kind of started this whole conversation off of debate between sunshine and rainbows versus doom and gloom. And honestly, I think we've covered both aspects of it. Were there any final thoughts, either sunshiny or gloomy, that you would like to wrap this up on?
Dude, I feel like we did do kind of a mixed bag and covered a bit of like, not like both sidesism for the sake of it, but really there is complexity, and Google, nobody there is specifically trying to do evil things, nor are they like, Pollyanniashly like trying to do the, I mean, they kind of should be like, that's what we kind of want them to do, is do better. I feel like we covered, I feel fair.
I feel fair
I don't
too.
even think we're required to be fair, but we are.
Yeah. And I mean, you're absolutely right. Google's contributed this enormous amount of value to the world and now has access to so many dials that we see them being moved sometimes, right? So I think that's kind of where we're at now. And we're just at that point where transparency is so critical, I guess, for humans to trust what's going on, for us to look at consumers to trust.
I can contribute a little bit of this in terms of like internal knowledge of like how Google operates that maybe everybody doesn't know, but you sort of think of an organization as being kind of top down, where there's a hierarchy. You have like a boss, and then you have like top level managers, C-level or whatever, and then VPs or whatever. There's like this sort of built-in hierarchy that everybody anticipates a company to have, so like if you're going to make some changes to your ad machine algorithm, there's like layers, and those decisions sort of get made like by somebody up the chain or down the chain or wherever it belongs. But there's something of a unified like strategy across the whole company. Google is different. They've specifically organized themselves so that big important decisions at the product, like at the search level or at the ads level. By the way, the ads team and the search team are not the same team, and they don't even really communicate, I don't think. And like the Google Analytics team is completely its own thing, and all of its decisions are made by the product manager on that team. Similarly to all of everything that Google does, there's like essentially the decision making gets put on to the product, and so that's the thing. It's agile. It's kind of like we have a disadvantage in this case where you kind of have like this: I'm going to optimize, and you've got all these kind of like mildly not necessarily evil, but kind of on the sort of just grabbing a little extra, like 5% here, 2% there, across all of the teams, just kind of messing things up. Like I feel like it might be like a cultural thing that might actually be something that has to come from the top in order to like get everybody moving to the correct North Star, actually.
That's an interesting perspective there. Yeah, that's good insight. It's hard to move a giant machine like this in any direction.
Yeah, and it really just has to be sort of like, here's the direction that we're all going to go, and that can really only come from the top, I think.
Well, those are a whole bunch of fantastic insights. I learned a bunch today. So I want to thank you both for your time and insight. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, had a great time.
Cool. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we'll do it again.
Let's do it again.
Like and
Bye, everyone.
subscribe to videos from SpyFu. Like and subscribe. SpyFu is on YouTube. YouTube.